First on BBC4, find out if you're as middle class as you think you are. And if you are middle class, what kind of middle class?
My name is Tim Lott. As a novelist, the class system in Britain has always fascinated me. But in the last few years, many of the fundamental ideas that underpin my notions of class have been challenged.
Turn and face the strain. Changes. Don't wanna be a richer man.
The social landscape of Britain has been transformed. Escalating levels of prosperity have allowed an unparalleled number of people to upscale their lives.
They can afford to take long-haul holidays, to eat out in fancy restaurants, and send their children to university. But does that mean we're living now in a homogenous middle-class nation?
What defined a person as middle class used to be straightforward. A profession, owning a home, having a good education. The middle classes were bound by core values such as politeness and respect for the law and a certain refinement of behaviour. But the ranks of the middle class have been swelled by a new group, and now nothing is quite so clear.
But many of the new recruits have very different values and aspirations. This new parallel middle class is proud, individualist, buccaneering. They are the children of Thatcher and of Blair. Actually, they don't want to be middle class. They just want more stuff. That's why I don't call them the bourgeoisie, but the mourgeoisie.
I've had 2 or 3 4x4s. You know, they're a good way of fitting into a busy lifestyle, a modern lifestyle in and around town, really.
This relentlessly rising tide of affluence has challenged the status of the established middle class, and they don't like it. So they're having to deploy new strategies to keep the bourgeoisie at bay. One of their main weapons is to tout their moral superiority in order to stay one step ahead in terms of status.
It's nice to be seen to be green now.
If you can recycle and compost, then that's good for the environment, I suppose.
In the opening decade of the new millennium, a new kind of class war is being waged.
In this programme, I want to examine the shifting landscape of 21st century Britain and find out what these changes mean for the middle classes themselves and for the nation as a whole.
The best place to get a perspective on the changing social landscape of Britain is a tall building. As a Londoner, looking out across the city has always given me a certain sense of pride in London's social cohesion, despite its large disparities of wealth.
If you look out from here, you can see places where the middle classes and the less fortunate have lived side by side quite happily for many years. But if you look more closely, you'll see that pockets are emerging. A new section of the middle class, what I've dubbed the bourgeoisie, aren't content with merely being better off than other parts of their country. What they want is to actually have physical barriers between themselves and the rest of society.
Welcome to the world of the gated community.
Now that you've found your paradise, this is your kingdom to command. You can go outside and polish your car, or sit by the fire in your Shangri-La.
There are over 1,000 gated communities in the UK, most of them built since 1995. They range from exclusive greenbelt suburban estates to inner-city enclaves, like this one in London's Bow area.
What I love about Bow Quarter is Bow Quarter itself. I mean, you just really, if you walk through the gardens here, if you look at everything like the pond, the general demeanour of the place, you can't match it, really.
Bow Quarter was one of the UK's first gated communities. A former match factory in London's East End, it was converted in 1989, and it attracts a new kind of tenant to an old part of town.
There's between 12 and 1,300 people, and I would suspect they're mainly professional people, city workers and media, PR, lots of people like that. You can't go anywhere.
Bow Quarter offers more than just security. It offers a whole lifestyle.
We have a shop, we have a bar and a restaurant, we have a leisure centre, swimming pool, sauna, jacuzzi, steam room, weights room. So it's pretty much everything you ever wanted. You don't have to leave if you don't want it.
Got a mortgage hanging over his head.
Why is a section of our burgeoning middle class so keen to lock itself behind gates? And what does this mean for the rest of us?
Conditioned that way.
Gated communities are an obscene idea. I mean, really, it's just putting you in a little bubble. It's like being a very precious plant in a nursery, a dope plant, because you will end up quite dopey, actually, if you don't meet other people.
Are gated communities simply the result of an increasing wealth gap and the consequent fear of crime? Or do they signify the rise of a new breed of self-sufficient, self-regarding individualists eager to opt out of the larger ungated society, or what we used to call the community?
I think it's all well and good saying that these aren't a great idea, but, you know, if you get mugged at the top of the road, the police don't turn up for 2 hours, it's all over.
The idea of physical barriers separating rich and poor isn't new. In 1937, the owner of a private estate in Oxford built a wall separating his middle-class residents from a new council estate built next door.
Where's number 20 Sawyer Road, is? Oh, that's down here. But there's a wall across, you see, so you'll have to go right round the town and come in the other way.
The slum clearances of the 1930s forced a paranoid middle class to live cheek by jowl with the riffraff.
The barrier was erected to protect our interests. Although not snobs, we do not wish our estate to become a perfect bedlam.
There are examples of council tenants moving out to the suburbs, describing themselves as feeling as though they lived in leper colonies when they met their middle-class neighbours. And one has to think that in the 1930s, class divisions had never been more spiteful or wider.
Class today is much less clearly defined. The residents of Bow Quarter have different backgrounds and a variety of accents, but they have one thing in common: a certain level of affluence. They represent a class shift, the roots of which can be traced back to the 1980s.
To the birds and bees, I want money.
The architect of this new money society herself bought a house inside one of the very first gated communities in Dulwich Village.
Mrs. Thatcher and her husband Dennis are buying a house in South London, which it's thought could cost them more than £400,000.
The Thatchers will be protected by the estate's closed-circuit television and high walls.
It could be said that these communities are bricks and mortar manifestations of Margaret Thatcher's mantra, "There's no such thing as society."
Maggie and Dennis moved into a gated community, but really that was about us keeping them in, back.
Gated communities are obvious outcrops of Margaret Thatcher and her constituency of ambitious, isolated wealth seekers. But the foundations of the modern gated community were laid in America.
I I can work here with a fax machine and a computer. I don't really have to walk out of my door. My wife and I, we don't like to go out and stand in line to go to a show, to go to restaurants and things like that. So we'd rather barbecue out on the deck or cook here at home or watch a movie on the VCR. We'd go to very few theaters because we don't want to stand in line and sit there and have somebody talking behind us. But yet, we're not antisocial.
In the States, because they pay their own taxes to the gated community, they've said, well, we don't see why we should pay taxes to local government as well. So they've incorporated almost a sort of mini city-states. And the more people who take themselves out of wider society, the more the notion of society is going to suffer.
And it's not just a localised phenomenon. 6% of Americans, that's an astonishing 16 million of them, now live in purpose-built gated communities.
The gates are necessary to keep out scum or whatever you call these gangs, riffraff, things like that.
Of all high-income nations, the United States has the most unequal distribution of wealth. So, is this a vision of Britain's future? Our increasingly powerful bourgeoisie are fueling the rise of the gated communities, which are monuments to our very own rapidly widening wealth gap.
What's important is the way development is occurring now and the way our towns and cities are sort of fracturing into these sort of hot areas and cold areas, sort of citadels of affluence side by side with areas of social exclusion.
The way that it's put forward is you've got poor children with no shoes on standing outside looking through our gates, looking at us. It's nothing like that. And people should have the right to be able to choose where they live.
But where's it going to lead us? Writer J.G. Ballard had his own vision of a segregated community in his 1965 television drama 13 to Centaurus.
There is no other world but this. There are no other creatures but the chosen, and their children shall inherit the universe.
Good God, man, you can't go down there and live with them. You'll never come out. I don't want to any more than they do. But you're setting off on a mad dream, on a one-way voyage to nowhere.
Where's it going to end, really? With sort of panic rooms and, sort of actual kind of fortifications within one's own home.
Could you hear me, darling?
Yes, what is that?
I was talking to you from my panic room.
Panic room?
We know that fear of crime is far, far higher than actual crime itself. But there's this other sort of psychological sort of fear about life in general.
Do you think some murderers can honestly say, "Oh, Jim, let her get a Trivial Pursuit before we chop off her arm and pull off her Rolex, do you, darling?" Whoosh, boing, 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 boing.
Mum, you're just paying into the whole panic culture. I hate it. The world is actually safer than it's ever been. In fact, you're more likely to be hit by a bus.
Oh, yeah, darling, that'd be ironic, wouldn't it? Closest I've ever been to public transport and it runs over me.
OK, it's not that bad. Yet.
When you go into your gated community and the gates shut behind you, you're in your own place and you're safe and you're sort of enclosed. If everybody starts to make that kind of choice, I think the urban fabric as a whole is really going to suffer.
Are we destined to become a polarised nation of haves and have-nots? Well, maybe. But I like to think that one of our great British virtues has been that we're good at rubbing along, mucking in with each other, participating as communities, not as enclaves. Is Bow Quarter a symbol of a world where these community values are on the decline? A world where a new kind of citizen, spearheaded by the self-interested bourgeoisie, retreats behind gates? I sincerely hope not.
Now I live here, I can't imagine living anywhere else. And if anyone, any politician, was to try and tell me that I couldn't live like this, then they would have a fight on their hands.
I like to think of SUVs as gated communities on wheels. They're kind of luxury cages in which you can look down on the rest of the world, not only metaphorically, but literally.
I drive up to Maswell Hill. I've even been to Selseyville.
I must admit I used to have a four-wheel drive Jeep myself in the 1980s. Probably one of the first people in the West End to drive around in one of these city vehicles. I thought I looked cool in it, wearing my little Paul Smith suit. But in the end I got rid of it. I thought it was ridiculous. Now there's a whole tranche of the new middle class following in my absurd footsteps. What they're buying is bigger, more expensive and even more silly.
I've had 2 or 3 4x4s, even before we had children. I used to do quite a bit of windsurfing, sailing, golf, rugby. Boys play rugby. You know, the car it's a car that we can do anything with as a family and take anywhere, really.
But why are so many people buying such over-the-top vehicles? I've got a feeling that they're not using them to their full potential. Once upon a time, the four-wheel drive vehicle knew its place. And the people who drove them knew theirs. In the 1950s, the Land Rover was the workhorse of the country elite. In 1970, the more bourgeois Range Rover was launched. With its exclusive image, its luxury, comfort and rugged performance, it had an instant snob appeal. The middle class could buy into a vehicle which instantly suggested you owned your own land and were part of the hunting, fishing and shooting sector. But it was the 1990s that saw sales rocket as a newly rich part of society bought into the classic status symbol and all that it stood for. Now the 4x4 has invaded our cities, and the Chelsea tractor has for years been the must-have of one particular middle-class constituency.
You get this phenomenon that just changes city streets completely. It is the woman, it's always a woman, 99% of the time, because that's her role, to look after the children whilst the man does nothing. And she drives this ridiculous, huge vehicle round city centres to take a child to school.
A lot of my friends drive these Jeeps, and they call themselves, ironically, Jews in Jeeps. But I prefer to call them deranged Rovers.
Do they really need sat-nav and 20-inch Alpine radials to navigate Jeremy and Jemima through the treacherous suburban landscape to the nearest desirable school?
Why is it that London mothers on the school run feel they need a sort of four-wheel drive that would really only come into its own in, say, Kathmandu? I mean, this is insane. I mean, they should be up the Himalayas, but all they're on is the high road in a traffic jam.
It's a great middle-class phenomenon, these cars with V8 5-litre engines, and this woman frustrated doing an 18-point turn to get it around in front of some tiny little nursery school. This tiny child has to be driven through all this traffic.
Whilst these cars might generate an illusion of power for their owners, more and more they've become a symbol of an increasingly splintered society.
I think that the popularity of SUVs and tanks is another reflection of the fragmented nature of British life.
It's part of the me culture of my safety and staying away from everyone else and them not affecting me or touching me.
Why not invest in the kids' safety really a little bit? We do feel a lot better with them in this car and a lot safer with them in here.
Perhaps the popularity of the 4x4 makes explicit one of the unspoken principles of both the old and the new middle class. That is, you can only look after everything else once you've looked after yourself.
I think that's how British people do think, in that sort of, they don't think in a collective way, they don't think in a civic way, they think in a very individualistic way, me, me, me.
The environmental lobby has kick-started the bandwagon of protest against these vehicles. But I think what's got them into such a lather is more than just fears about safety in the environment.
Free mud wash for your 4x4.
I don't doubt these people's good intentions, but perhaps there's something else going on under the veneer of mud.
We're ready in case anyone wants to take us up on our offer to make their 4x4 look a bit more credible in the city and look like it's being used for its real purpose.
Could it be that they're protesting against a new flashy urban breed who quite literally don't know their place? And it's up to the old middle class, in the guise of eco-warriors, to take them down a peg or two.
Free mud wash for the urban 4x4! With that authentic off-road appearance!
The enemy is no longer posh school run mum, it's the bourgeoisie. It's white van man. This decline in the social cachet of the 4x4 has coincided with a drop-off in sales. Some people will say the Green lobby has won the battle for hearts and minds, but I would argue the 4x4 has lost its sheen as an exclusive middle-class status symbol. So the old bourgeoisie is having one of their favourite status symbols usurped by an aggressive bourgeoisie who are quite happy to flash the cash in order to separate themselves off from the rest of the people who don't earn as much money as they do. Nowadays, a white van man is quite likely to display a sticker saying, "My other car's a Chelsea tractor," and you know what? He'd do it with pride.
Everybody has a summer holiday, doing things they always want.
Where should we go on holiday this year? A villa in Tuscany? Alpine trekking? Wine tasting in Australia? Pearl diving in the Pacific? There was a time when taking a holiday was simple. It was about sun and sand and sea. How things have changed. Nowadays, for many people, when they go away for a break, it's about making a statement about your lifestyle, about your identity, about who you are. Choice of holiday is a sure indicator of where you sit on the class ladder. And in the last 15 years, the number of British people flying abroad has increased by 120%. Now everyone is competing with everyone else to go one step further and better.
I mean, a lot of the traditional holiday places have sort of passed their amuse-by date for the middle class, so we're looking for more and more extreme holiday experiences.
The launch of low-cost airlines has opened up the world to the new middle class.
Start leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm a racing car passing by like Lady Godiva. I'm gonna go, there's no stopping me.
Now, EasyJet will fly you out to Prague for a stag weekend and you can get nailed and have a punch up in the central square and be back in time to do your job down at Computing Central for Monday morning.
Suddenly, thanks to low-cost flying, you are able to fly. And suddenly you might think, hang on, I'm flying every couple of months. I must be middle class. Hooray, I've made it.
Now everyone's going everywhere, you have to do a little bit more to prove you're a class apart.
In order to show that you are cultured or educated, you have to find that extra thing in your holiday. You can't just go to France, you have to go to France and drink wine at that chateau. You can't just go to Spain, you have to speak Spanish and either go to the bullfight or protest against the bullfight, depending on your affiliation. Those are things that are still quite marked out in a class-conscious way.
If you belong to the self-improving bourgeoisie, you might brush up on your watercolours in Malta, or get in touch with your inner child in Thailand. Getting the Aboriginal perspective, feeling the Maori spirit of Pakia, the whale rider, and meeting with the fathers of the rainforest. If you're down with the more adventure-seeking bourgeoisie, you might take a more hedonistic approach.
You can go shark diving, you know, and rub snouts with a great white in South Africa.
You're going to have great adventures. You're going to be whitewater rafting.
Unfortunately, this is the new trend.
What unites everyone is that they're looking for something special, something unique, to demonstrate their cultural status as international globetrotters. Mountaineering, tribal, indigenous, llama trekking.
We got to go to the Andes and sort of, you know, travel on the back of a strange animal whilst needing to take oxygen.
You're going to be ballooning across the Serengeti. Marvellous thing to do at sunset with a nice glass of champagne.
It gets you points at dinner parties. Well, you wonder whether people are actually enjoying these holidays or whether they're actually thinking, this will sound good.
But could middle-class dinner party one-upmanship actually be threatening the planet? One transatlantic 747 spews out more carbon dioxide than an average motorist in an entire year. And since 1990, emissions of greenhouse gases from aircraft have more than doubled.
This terrible dichotomy that you want to expand your horizons, you want to go everywhere that you possibly can, you want to go to the ends of the earth, so you can come back and say you've been to the ends of the earth and this is what they're like. But at the same time, you know that this is a very bad thing for the planet and it cannot continue. So what are you going to do?
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Suddenly it's, oh, hang on, should we be doing that? It's not good, is it? And so every middle-class dinner party conversation is sort of rigged with tripwires all round. You know, I could trip up, I could make a mistake here, and someone will go, but you shouldn't do that. And you go, oh yes, no. So they're suffering.
But the middle classes are adept at assuaging their guilt. Now, when they travel the world, they think they can save it at the same time.
And that's where us lot come in, the Earthwatch volunteers. We're joining in the ongoing research into elephant behaviour and the effect on the vegetation, which is something I'm quite interested in.
Eco-tourism resorts, they are so funny. It's fantastic. You feel as though you're doing the planet a personal favour by going there. But, of course, there's the small matter of having to fly 11,000 miles there and back to get to this wonderfully environmentally friendly location.
The morally conscious middle classes know what they should be doing, saving the planet, but they choose to ignore what they know they shouldn't be doing, travelling to the ends of the earth.
Yes, there is a huge middle-class conscience about air travel, but it's something that I don't think we properly deal with, any of us. Unless you want to stay at home and cycle around your local area, which has some appeal, but frankly, I'd rather see the world.
So, if the eco-holiday is just another exercise in middle-class hypocrisy, what are they going to do to resolve their dilemma? Are they really going to give up their air miles, the villa in Tuscany, the winters in Barbados, all for the sake of a few million poverty-stricken people living in flood-threatened corners of the earth? I wouldn't hold your breath, not unless you happen to be pearl fishing in the Pacific, of course. not only the social landscape of Britain that's been transformed, it's the cultural landscape as well. Nowadays you can see football terrace-sized crowds going to places like the Tate Modern in order to see a Kandinsky exhibition, or maybe a Damien Hirst. Culture has become democratised, and you would think that was a really good thing. However, there are some people who consider it to be not such a good thing at all. In fact, it's encroaching on the territory of the old middle classes. You can tell these people because they say it's dumbing down, which I think is pretty dumb itself.
Your class and the culture you consumed were once inextricably linked.
I am highbrow. I can quote liberally from the works of Keats, and as a result of breeding and education, my sensibilities are finely attuned to the appreciation of poetic nuance. I look down on him.
I am middlebrow. Being denied his advantages, I'm ashamed to admit that Keats doesn't do much for me. What I call a rattling good read is something by Raymond Chandler. So I look up to him, and I look down on him.
Biffo!
High culture used to be the preserve of the upper and only the very aspirational middle classes.
Middle class people generally like to think people think they're cultured. They like to drop a line in about we saw some Puccini or something, which is an Italian food, isn't it?
Now, everyone wants a slice of high art. In recent years, the huge rise of the number of outdoor concerts has brought a whole new audience to classical music.
A classical concert in the park is a great opportunity for people to come out and go, we're very cultured. But the occasional times I've been to one, there seems to be a lot of drinking of white wine and giggling and spilling things going on.
People appreciate, I think, more so these days, finer music, I think, more so than headbanging. I certainly do, anyway.
It's nice to meet with cultured persons, people who have a taste in the broader aesthetics, members of the cognoscenti, people who have a taste for the finer things in life, such as myself.
Our wealthy and aspirational new middle-class cognoscenti are flexing their cultural muscle like never before.
The new middle class is the consumer class, and if you can afford to pay for it, you can have it, no matter what it is.
And the bourgeoisie is even finding its instant gratification in the realms of what used to be known as high culture. Art galleries and sales rooms, once the preserve of the wealthy elite, are now full to bursting with the new middle class, eager to consume everything. But as high art filters down, the old middle class gets nervous.
There'll be the purists who say, well, you're diluting high culture and actually you're coming up with something which is so far away from it and you're turning it into this sort of chocolate box.
There's a big concern about dumbing down that old middle class shibboleth, and I think what we're seeing there is the old middle classes tend to have a very heavy emphasis on cultural capital and perhaps less economic capital, really worrying about a new scheme of values emerging in society.
This is a scheme of values which is epitomised by a very modern cultural phenomenon, reality television. An example of ultra-democratic culture in which bottom-up values rule in a world of celebrity for all. But television used to represent top-down culture, with the Reithian principles of education and information coming before entertainment.
In Conversations for Tomorrow, J.B. Priestley entertains two distinguished guests to dinner.
Now those principles have largely turned into entertainment, entertainment, entertainment.
Television rules the nation.
addictive, it grabs you. It's like a car crash, you don't want to watch it, but you have to have a look. And inevitably, people get sucked into it, and I think it's quite possible there are middle-class people who kind of watch these programmes and feel guilty when they're watching them. I shouldn't be watching it.
It's a real site of struggle within the middle classes as to whether, is reality TV permissible in any way, shape or form? Can you say something intelligent about it, and does that make it worthwhile, or is that, by its very nature, not worthwhile culture?
And it's not just TV. New technology means culture is for everyone. The old middle class have seen their cultural ghettos crumble as the new middle class, with money, computers and unbounded curiosity, storm the barricades. The game is up. Now anyone can do it.
Social status is almost defined by how omnivorous you are, how much you're prepared to consume all different kinds of culture. And to the extent that you're a cultural univore, you're a dinosaur.
Listen, highbrow, lowbrow, what do those terms actually mean? At the moment, I'm writing a postmodernist, neo-structuralist novel in which John Keats time travels and becomes a seminal rapper. And as far as Chandler's concerned, I love Chandler in an ironic, retro sort of way. And this week in my home studio, I've been sampling some of that old Dylan stuff and remixing it into a sort of electro-funk, brick, shithouse, trash, thrash, flash, rehash. But I still look down on him.
What I call a rattling good read is something by Raymond Chandler. I am a monstrous carbuncle.
Hi, I'm a commissioning editor for arts programmes. I look down on everybody, but hey, that's your job description. Let's do lunch. We're planning this programme. Biffo the Bear is a sort of cultural icon. Interesting?
An old middle class may just have got used to the idea that culture ain't what it used to be. And I can't see what's wrong with that. Alright, maybe some of the people going to see Kandinsky haven't got a clue what they're looking at. Maybe some of those people at the concert in the park don't know what they're listening to. But is anyone seriously suggesting they'd be better off getting pissed in a pub instead? So, let's lighten up on this. Britain is becoming culturally more middle class. But that's not dumbing down. It's wising up.
Education, education, and education.
Of course, the great middle class obsession is education. Nowadays, it's a question of whether you can get your kids into the right nursery school, let alone the right primary school, let alone the right secondary school, let alone the right college or the right university. It's all part of the great middle class vision of the future. And the middle class believe in the future, whereas the bourgeoisie tend to live more in the here and now. Anyway, the same upwardly mobile pressures that have been stressing the old middle classes in all other areas of life are now beginning to hit the groves of academia.
We're only making plans for Nigel. We only want what's best for him.
There's an expression you hear all the time, which is, I want the best for my children. And it irritates me a bit, because everyone says it and it's supposed to be lauded as being a fantastic thing to say. But I always say, well, what about everybody else's children? They're living in this world with them. And it just seems to be a very negative side of middle class thinking, is actually we want the best for our children. Just our children.
Go to college or university, get a real job, that's what they said to me, but I could never live.
The expansion in the university sector in the past few years has remodelled the face of higher education in Britain, and at the same time has meant that for the middle class, a degree has lost its shine. Back in the 1950s, a university education was still the preserve of the elite.
Today, out of a class of 40 primary school children, only 4 of them are likely to go on later to any form of higher education.
But with the growth of higher education, the building of new universities and the introduction of student grants, more and more people were able to experience student life. Today the government is aiming to get 50% of all 18 to 30-year-olds into higher education. Dominic Alder, studying drama at Bristol University, is one of the new intake who know that being an undergraduate is not the guaranteed meal ticket that it once was.
Nowadays, it does feel like there's a lot of competition. You have to be the person that's one step ahead. People shouldn't be complacent about having a degree. I think, as in they shouldn't think, oh, I've got a degree, I'll be fine, because in reality, that's not going to happen. People have to be a lot more on the ball and a lot more strategic.
So, more universities, more students, more competition. Predictably, it causes rumbles of discontent in the ranks of the middle class.
Universities are under enormous financial pressure to open their doors still further to students from poorer backgrounds. Critics say that's social engineering. The government that it's widening opportunity.
We were accustomed to those accusations that we were biased against state school applicants in favour of independent school ones. And then all of a sudden Bristol was portrayed as being biased in the other direction, biased against applicants from the independent sector and in favour of applicants from the state sector. Some of the media stoked up or preyed on middle class fears in particular, that we'd sort of fallen out of love with the middle classes and we weren't going to take their offspring anymore.
Education, of course, is a fantastic thing, but it's like I don't think that we're ever going to get a good education system in Britain until we care about everybody.
But it seems a place at education's top table is now for nearly everyone. And who could argue with that?
We have far too many universities in this country. It's really diluted the idea of a university, and it's diluted the degree. It was supposed to be a guarantee, a gold standard, that you had attended somewhere that meant you were of a particular ability. Well, no one can pretend that was the case with our universities now.
Dominic Alder.
Nowadays, I'd say it's, everybody's going to university. It just seems like the thing to do. So you're not one of the top lot if you get to go. You're just the norm, really. You have to be aware that you have to be one step ahead of everybody else. And what's going to make you different, what's going to make you better when you finish than everybody else that's got a degree.
So it's no longer enough to say, I went to university or I got a 2-1, because the next question is inevitably, as any employer knows, where from? And the employer will be ticking in the back of his head, is that a good university, is it a bad university?
I was speaking to my parents the other day about whether I thought my degree was worthwhile. And they said, well, you've got a degree from Bristol University, so that counts for something because it's got a good reputation.
So, whilst there were once 2 universities, there are now 118. And if their kids don't go to one of the blue chip universities, which are as middle class as they ever were, then their degree isn't worth the scroll that it's written on. And so, as in other spheres, the middle class who voted for Tony Blair and the reforms in education find themselves compromised by the very phenomenon that they are party to creating in the first place. Yum yum, organic baked beans. Buy one get one free. organic fruit juice, free-range beef, organic cabbage. This really is the good life.
Right, here goes. I quit work, and we become as damn near self-sufficient as possible. We've got bags of garden, we grow our own food. We keep some animals, chickens, a pig. We produce our own energy, recycle rubbish.
We've come an awful long way since the 1970s, when a middle-class couple from Surbiton decided to give up the rat race and start living an organic, eco-sustainable lifestyle. Nowadays, you're about as cool as one of Margot Ledbetter's party frocks if you don't have a packet of organic bananas in your shopping basket.
We gotta learn to reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Today, the middle class are painfully aware that they're part of an interdependent world where the environment matters and where they have to do at least something about it.
We gotta learn to reduce. And if your brother or your sister's got some cool clothes, you could try them.
You really know when something is up when even the Tory party is on the environmental case.
David Cameron has said he wants to put a wind turbine atop his home as part of a £10,000 eco makeover to reduce his carbon emissions.
David Cameron knows that Middle England is desperate to do the right thing by the planet.
I sort of see myself as a sort of, a fairly typical angst-ridden consumer. A good description of this kind of slight niggle that I had within me is in what I call the kind of Monge 2 moment. And the kind of Monge 2 moment is that moment when you reach down to pick up, say, a packet of Monge 2, and you kind of know that, oh, it's covered all in that plastic packaging, where's that been flown in from? You kind of have a little bit of a moment thinking about who's the farmer.
Save the planet for another day.
Maybe I shouldn't have bought that. Maybe I should have gone to my local greengrocer, supported them. I should have thought about food miles. But actually, I'm a bit busy at the moment. I'll leave that for another day.
Save the planet for another day.
But if it is middle-class concern that has helped to push the eco movement forward, is saving the planet the only motivation? I have a hunch that good old bourgeois aspiration might have something to do with this new trend.
I think it's very interesting to note that if you look at the top-selling ethical products, they're all social products. They're all the kinds of products that when someone comes around to your house, they're the kind of products that your guests will see. So it's tea, it's coffee, it's your washing up liquid, your loo paper.
You see these kind of organic health products which you really do question kind of what their environmental credentials are, and a bottle of water from Fiji or whatever it is, and you kind of think, well, that's kind of missing the point slightly.
Fiji spring water, which some of my girlfriends buy, they're buying it because they want to be, they want to be kind to their bodies, and they want to be environmentally conscious, and bring in water from some precious spring. This is insane for many reasons. One is the environmental cost. I mean, the thought of all these mountains of plastic bottles that won't biodegrade, the cost of the transport, when we could just as easily drink a nice cold glass of Chateau Thames.
There's a paradox in the sense that what's called the good old middle class has lost the plot. The obligatory trip to the farmer's market on the weekend, where you demonstrate that you're at one with nature, to then getting into your SUV or to your Land Rover and demonstrating to the world that you got what it takes to be part of this new lifestyle, and you got the wherewithal to sustain it.
It's easy to buy good food if you can afford it. And if it's organic and free range, then you can both have your wild duck and apricot sausages and eat them at the same time.
Yeah, we've come to the top 5 butchers in the country. Typical customers. Most of them have got quite good jobs. You get a lot of these solicitors from downtown, the doctors from over the hospital.
Playing piggy pranks. And you can see them on the trotters down at the piggy banks. Paying piggy thanks to
In actual fact, you know, if I was on a normal wage, a butcher's wage, and I had to feed a family of 4 or 5, there's no way I could afford to buy that, even though my priorities are good food.
Can see them out for dinner with the picky wives, touching forks and knives to eat their bacon.
But whatever you think of it, middle class purchasing power is driving the environmental revolution.
Middle class customers and some of the others are driving us in the right direction, and that's good for the population as a whole, as I see it.
I mean, you could point the finger at the middle classes and say, look, they buy this fair trade coffee, they eat the organic food because it makes them look good. It sits with how they want to appear at a dinner party. But against that is, I think, doing enormous good, because actually, unless people buy it, it won't be on the shelves in the supermarkets. People do benefit from it, and they will be healthier if they eat well, which is what we want people to be healthy.
Farmer, farmer, put away the DDT now. Give me spots on the apples, or leave me the birds and the bees.
There's another aspect to the bourgeoisie's appetite for environmental correctness. As well as their diet of organic bran and fair trade chocolate, they live on a diet of shame. They want to be world citizens, they want to feel themselves at the moral cutting edge, but at the same time, they don't want to give up their privileges. The result? Perpetual sense of guilt. Other than wiping their bottoms with recycled loo paper, is there anything else that the middle class can do to redeem themselves?
This is a Bath recycling centre. On a Sunday, people used to get up at 10 o'clock and go to the church. Now people get up 10 o'clock and come to our recycling centre. It's nice to be seen to be green now, but if you have a look at the traffic flow outside, you've got big engine vehicles sat outside with the engines ticking over for 20-25 minutes. They come down here to dispose of 1 bag, maybe 2 bags of waste.
I think everybody's so much more aware these days that there's so much that they can recycle. So places like this are just tremendously important. I think they need to be supported. And if you can recycle and compost, then that's good for the environment, I suppose.
Like most values and most rituals and most social symbols, they begin with the middle class, but they gradually filter down to the rest of society. It's no longer about human beings or human behavior, but it's whether you recycle or not, whether you pollute or not. And I think it's quite interesting that when you go, for example, to a dump near a small town, it's a certain kinds of people that go there.
People actually turn up here in their Sunday best. We've got a young lady there, dressed to kill. Amazing what you see down here. All right, lads?
As with all ceremonial rituals, it's important to be looking your very best. For heaven's sake, don't get garbage on your Gucci's.
I think now that we've become more agnostic to what can make us feel virtuous these days, going to the dump, recycling, taking our plastic bottles in our huge 4-wheel drives to the dump and recycling makes us feel cleansed. We go there and we worship at the altar of our own wonderfulness.
The hypocrisy is rife, but it's actually, we're all hypocrites, we're all doing it. It's just whether the middle classes are slightly more hypocritical because they want to present themselves in a way that is, oh, but we are very green and we respect all this. There's no hypocrisy in someone that says, I can't be arsed with all this recycling. There's no hypocrisy there. You know, it's just, it's not the right attitude in my view, but there's no hypocrisy.
These things will come to pass when heroes of the middle class face up to their responsibility.
One of the problems with green issues and environmentally friendly consumption is that they become just another kind of lifestyle statement. Buying organic is just another way of saying I belong to a particular class. Now, I'm fully in favour of the ecology movement, of wind farms, farmers markets. The question is, will the bourgeoisie take it beyond mere tokenism? But whatever the contradictions, I wonder who from The Good Life would be having the last laugh.
Remember Margot from The Good Life? How snooty she was about anything organic. She would now, in Waitrose, only be buying organic mung beans that have been blessed by the Dalai Lama. That's what she would be in her shopping trolley now. So that's a real shift.
So what have we learnt from our journey? There's little doubt that the rising levels of affluence have profoundly changed our society. In that sense, most of us really are middle class now. But one of the results of this is that the old middle class, the bourgeoisie, have entered into a new subtle class war with the up-and-coming mourgeoisie. In many ways, these new, pushy, hard-working individualists are revitalising our nation in terms of our attitudes and culture. But a small section has no wish to join in and wants to lock itself away behind closed gates, which in my view can only be a bad thing. But meanwhile, the bourgeoisie are in crisis. As they lose ground in terms of power and status, they're looking for new ways to stand out from the crowd and demonstrate their moral superiority and purpose. The environmental bandwagon provides the perfect vehicle for them to demonstrate this, except that it's incompatible with their life of privilege.
Sure enough, with the bourgeoisie snapping at their heels, they're starting to think about giving up their Chelsea tractors. But will nothing be left behind but a kind of empty piety? What about the shrink-wrapped kiwi fruit from Waitrose? What about the second homes in Tuscany? What about the wasteful ski trips to far-flung destinations? They talk the talk, but I wonder, will they ever walk the walk?
Are you really gonna do it this time? Are you really gonna do it this time? Are you really gonna do it this time?
A middle-class preoccupation with punctuation and grammar in half an hour on BBC4. Comedy after news from around the world. Next.
This time, are you really gonna do it this time?